Scott, I'm going to do a little official stuff, is the author of 4 popular books: Making Things Happen, The Myths of Innovation, Confessions of a Public Speaker, and Mindfire, Big Ideas for Curious Minds. So that's 4 books plus 1. His work as a writer and speaker have appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wired, The Economist, Fast Company, Forbes, CNBC, MSNBC, CNN, National Public Radio, and other media. And his latest book has a big picture of underpants on the cover. So please give a big hand to Scott Berkun.
Thank you. My mom is very proud of this cover. Actually, she's not. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So I want to thank all the organizers for letting me come here and talk to you, and especially Leah. She said that she was happy to share the stage with me, but this was originally her entire slot, and she was gracious enough to let me share it. So round of applause for Leah, please. And I really thought that your talk was really good. In fact, while I was there halfway through, I'm thinking I should scrap this entire talk, and I wanted to try to talk about some of the things that you did. So I have a conversation I want to have with you later. But for now, you guys are going to have to talk about, or listen to me talk to you about the year without pants. So I've had 2 careers so far in my life. I spent about a decade leading software teams. They were usually interdisciplinary teams, so I led teams of developers and designers and testers and marketers and other things. And then I quit that career in 2003 to try to write books, as Christian mentioned. And I've written 5 books, including this one. And I've tried to ask really big questions. I've tried to take things that I know a bit about and then push my own knowledge to see what kinds of big questions can I answer. So these books that I've written are about a lot of different things. And although my background is in user experience design and software, I've written about a lot of different kinds of topics. I wrote a book about the real things you should probably know about innovation, called The Myths of Innovation. I wrote a book about the things you probably should know about project management, called Making Things Happen. And I've been very fortunate enough to be able to do this for about a decade. But one big question or radical question I have about authorship in general, especially authors who are writing books that are supposed to teach you something about something you do for a living, that there's this very large vulnerability that we have, and that most of the people who are known to be experts, people who are professional experts, probably haven't done the thing that is the basis for their expertise in a long time. And if you think through the people who are the famous consultants, you think through the people who are famous authors. I'm not pointing to myself as a famous author, just that I am an author. But if you think through all the people who end up on television to explain what's going on, they're usually people who are not practitioners, and I think that's dangerous. I think you can certainly be a good teacher and give good advice without being a practitioner yourself, but the longer the window of time is between the time you've actually done it and the current day when you're giving advice, I think there's danger there. So I knew at some point I wanted to go back and lead a software team and do UI design work and do it again and find out how much of my own advice I practiced. And more importantly, figure out what new stuff is going on now that I should learn about and that I'm probably dismissing because what I claim is, well, the old school way is the right way. There's probably new ways of thinking about work that I am not familiar with, and I'll never really even give it a shot unless I am forced to as a byproduct of my job. So that's the story of this book. It's called The Year Without Pants. I actually spent 20 months working at WordPress.com. The book's called The Year Without Pants because 20 months without pants wasn't as good a title. We figured stick with the year. Going without pants at all seems problematic for some people, so I figured the shorter the time limit, the better. And I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to only talk for about 20 to 23 minutes, and I'm going to give you an overview of the book and tell you the inside stuff that I learned and observed. But mostly I wrote this book, and the best response to the book has been to see it as a kind of case study. Unlike most management books where some person is giving you the 5 ways, the 6 lessons, the 10 tricks, and it's all very heavy-handed, that somehow these things, written by someone who's never met you or worked at your company, is going to precisely solve all your problems. I think there's hubris and bullshit in that. And even if you talk to the people who write these books, they admit to you right up front, of course this can't work for you. That's why you should hire me as a consultant, so I can come in and customize it for you. So I think there's something broken about that. And I wanted to write a book that was much more honest. It was just, this is what happened as a year. If you think I'm smart, you've read a book of mine, or you saw an article I've read, you think I'm an expert on project management or UI design or whatever, here's what actually happened when you put me back in the workforce. Before I can talk about what actually happened to me, I need to set the table briefly about WordPress. How many of you have heard of WordPress? How many of you use WordPress? How many of you like WordPress? How many of you hate WordPress? All right. All right. Do you work at Google? No. Okay. Might have gotten lucky. So, a couple of quick things. WordPress is insanely popular. It's an open source project. It started in 2003. It currently powers about 20% of all websites. All websites, 20%. The reason why you don't know that number, you probably never heard that number before, is because WordPress started as an open source project. There's no marketing team. There's no PR division. PR is generated by people who use the thing itself. And so that's a fascinating way to think about brand and product growth, that you base your marketing on the people who actually use it. Now, where I worked, so WordPress has been popular for a while. It started in 2003. In 2005, the same guy who founded WordPress, a guy named Matt Mullenweg, decided to create a corporation to do some of the things the open source project couldn't do itself. The primary one being provide hosting, actual server space. WordPress is free and open source. You still need a server. They wanted to create WordPress.com as a place, a corporation that would run those servers. That's where I worked. WordPress.com has been amazingly successful. It's currently the 8th most popular, 8th most trafficked website on the planet. It passed Yahoo a few weeks ago on the Quantcast ratings. So it gets a ridiculous amount of activity. And I offer you these numbers not to impress you about WordPress. I don't work there anymore. I have no real stake in that game. But a lot of the things I'm going to share with you about their work practices are going to sound really strange. And a lot of the work practices that we talk about that are trendy or cool, that some startup is doing some weird thing where they only say each other's words in the sentences, or they'll stand on one foot, or they play Nerf games, whatever wacky thing that makes it on like 60 Minutes or Fast Company is some trendy thing. It's usually being done by some small, interesting, but not yet important startup. WordPress.com is not really a startup. It's been around for a long time. WordPress has been around for a long time. 20% market share over website services is an insanely large number that would make many billion-dollar corporations jealous. So WordPress, and the context in which I'm giving you all this stuff, is based on this very important product that lots of people use to run their businesses. So this is the slide of things that I knew before I took the job there. I didn't believe that most of these things could work, but these are the things that I was told and had been informed were their work practices. So first, nobody uses email. Nobody uses email. Think about your inbox. Think about your filters and rules, all the countermeasures you put into place to protect your inbox from the attacking invaders or people who send you email that you have to work with all the time. They don't use it at all. I'll show you what they actually do in a second. Second, and this is where one of the reasons for the title comes from, everybody works remotely. 100% of all the employees. They currently have about 205 employees. Everyone works from somewhere else. It's implied when you were hired, wherever you were and we hired you, you can stay there if you want, you can move. If you happen to be an astronaut on the side, you're in the space station, as long as you get good Wi-Fi and you check in your stuff on time, we don't care. Nobody cares. Third, they hire by trial, which is a very odd thing to consider, hire by trial. What does hire by trial mean? Hire by trial means instead of doing the bullshit meta abstract talk that we do in interview loops, we do all this processing where we do this pretend thing of we ask the interview questions and they try to figure out what we want to say and we go back and forth. Instead of doing that meta theatrical performance thing, they say, you know what? We're hiring you because you have a skill. We want you to do that skill for us, and then we will evaluate you for hiring based on your skill. Which sounds bizarre. I don't know of any company in the world that does purely hire by trial, except for them. There may be others, I haven't heard of them. That's kind of a shocking thing to do. It seems awkward and uncomfortable. How would that work? We do this in the real world all the time. If you were going to hire someone, let's say you have a wedding or you're throwing a big party, you go on a cake at the party, go to the baker. You wouldn't go to the baker and say, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses as a baker. Tell me about a cake that went wrong and what did you learn from that? You would never do that. That would be very strange. What would you do? You'd say, you're a baker, bake me a cake. Give me a cupcake. Give me some portion of the thing you're supposed to do that I'm hiring you for. So that's what they do. Purely that's what they do. And that is actually a secret. A lot of stuff I'm going to show you in a second is going to seem really strange. Well, how could that work? And what about people fighting over turf and da-da-da? Hire by trial is a fantastic filter for all of your cultural weirdnesses and biases because it filters people out who don't fit the culture through them actually doing work for you. So hire by trial turns out to be expensive, takes more time, but the hit rate is way higher. Everyone starts in customer support, so no matter what your job function is, including mine, I was hired to be a manager. I was actually one of the first managers ever hired. Up until I was hired, everyone just worked for Matt Mullenweg, and they decided to do this experiment called Teams. They didn't have Teams yet. This was like a radical idea that people were resistant to. Even I had to start spending my first 3 weeks by answering customer support tickets. Everybody has to do it. If you're a lawyer or marketer, it doesn't matter. Everybody does it. It's built in then that you will start, your first thing you're going to do for a month is just learn. And you're going to figure out how to make use of all the tools they use and communication tools without email to use your coworkers to help you learn. There's other stuff that are becoming more common but are generally unusual. They use continuous deployment, so they launch new stuff to the website daily, to the service every day, and individual designers or developers can commit code live as soon as they're done with whatever the project is they were working on. There's no master schedule, there's no executive reviews, there's no product roadmap spreadsheet that's mandated by executives. There's almost none of that. People are free to create that structure if they want it, but generally none of that stuff exists. Then lastly, there's an open vacation policy, so people are free to take off as much time as they want. So this is the magic answer to the email question. So there's 3 communication tools that are primarily used at Automattic. And they are, from left to right, IRC, Skype, and P2, which is basically a theme for blogs. It's this particular kind of theme, a WordPress theme that anyone can get. It's free and publicly available. So IRC, and this is where most of how did they do that without email? All that question, most that's answered here. IRC is your hallway. All the serendipitous stuff that goes on in your hallway, same stuff goes on there. Since people work remotely, you're in different time zones. You're never sure who's going to be online at any given time, but you can go in there and, hey, Bob, how's it going? What's going on? Just like you would in a hallway. Sometimes you might ask to try to find someone, just like you might do in a hallway. And they'll go, oh, he's over here. Oh, he's not going to be online until later. Sometimes meetings happen in IRC. There's different channels, which are basically just chat rooms. Anyone can create a chat room. The important thing, which will come up in many places, everything here is open to the company. All chat rooms are open to the company. You can have a meeting there, most teams do. You can have a conversation there. And there's a wide spectrum of formality, just like your hallway. Sometimes you probably end up having brainstorming discussions in the hallway. Sometimes you'll call a brainstorming meeting. There's the same range of flexibility in what goes on there. It's archived. Skype is the equivalent of one-on-one small group stuff. So as a manager guy, if I wanted to give feedback to someone that's a little more sensitive, I do it in Skype. Sometimes we'd have team meetings in Skype. Often those meetings were typed, which is really strange. It took me a long time to figure out why the hell are we typing? It's 2010. We have all this, but it turns out that typing, when you're working with people who are working on other things at the same time, typing can be, text can be asynchronous. I can say, hey, did you fix that bug yet? And go do something else. So it took a long time for me to convince my own team to actually have meetings where we talk to each other using our voices. This was a breakthrough. So Skype, anyway, let me finish this run through. Skype is where small team meetings can happen or one-on-one conversation. Skype is private, it's logged, personal to you, it's not public. There were no rules as a team for when we used which. And as I said, when I was hired, I was one of the first managers. There were 10 teams. Each team worked a little bit differently. Some teams spent more time in IRC. Some teams spent more time in Skype. No hard rules. It was up to you and your team to figure it out. Lastly, blogs. So this is where all the stuff that was design work or even engineering work, bug tracking, all took place on the blog. And if you imagine in the abstract what email is, someone sends a message or posts a prototype, a mock-up of something. Someone has a comment, they reply, someone replies, someone replies. That same structure can easily be replicated on a blog. It's the same thing. So that's what we did. I'd post a mock-up or a picture of something. Someone would come by and give some feedback. Maybe someone else would do like a response mock-up. What about this? And we would just go back and forth. The upside of the blog is that Unlike your email, it's visible, it's searchable. You can have a link to any part of it. Some people end up with these huge piles of intellectual property and good tacit knowledge about a project. It's all locked up in your email archive. This makes sure it's always visible and transparent and accessible. So anyway, that's the answer. How well this works and what problems it causes, if you have questions about it, we can talk about that later. But this is the solution. So everyone got an email account, but in the culture, you almost never needed to send email. Or if you did, it was for very specific things where you couldn't afford, you couldn't manage to get your communication need met using just these 3 tools. So this is a typical work conversation. My last name is Berkun. You can see in IRC. I show up in here a few times. This is me talking to my team about which bugs we're going to fix. Typical everyday conversation. Just pretty much verbatim, if you made a transcript of some of the same conversations in the actual room, this is what you would see. It looks very much the same. See a lot of smiley faces. One of the huge surprises for me, especially as a writer, was the general high level of communication skill among every employee at the company. And I remember my first week, it was shocking to me. Even though I haven't been a proper employee in a long time, I do consulting or I'll speak at places and I'll have email exchanges, and a lot of people just don't write well. Like really don't write well. No matter how senior they are, how long they've been VP of the division, you keep reading it, you're like, where did you learn to fucking write? You suck. Then there's the other people that you know who don't read well. You're like, did you read the first line of the email I sent you? I'm sure you know people like this. And often, if they have that bad habit, they become powerful. They don't have to listen to anyone's feedback about how poorly they read anymore. So they just don't. Anyway, I was personally surprised with a cultural observation. The quality, average communication skill in terms of all the HR-type words about qualifying questions and being a generous collaborator, all that stuff was just true. And I still haven't entirely figured out why. I think part of it's the hire by trial. To hire by trial means you're going to work on a trial project, and if you can't express yourself well in a culture that's so centered on communication, especially text communication, you'll never get past the hire by trial. So you could be a fantastic developer or designer. You wouldn't get hired purely because you don't write or don't read well. Think of all the people that you work with where that would be a huge improvement if you got rid of all the people who don't write and don't read well. Anyway, so that's a summary technologically in terms of tools about what the answer is to that question. And as I am alluding to, the mystery that we have about why some teams work and why they don't, this hints a little bit at some of the questions Leah was asking about why are some UX people successful or not. We tend to be so tech-centric. People are really surprised when I show them these 3 tools. I know when I was hired there, I thought for sure there'd be some really complex, high-end, virtual conferencing meeting software that it was top secret and no one knew about. That's how they're able to do the remote thing. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite. All 3 of these tools are free. They're cheap. IRC was made in like 1985. There's nothing magical in the tools. There's something different about the attitudes people have about what the important part of work is. This communicating well. And some of that comes from Matt Mullenweg, the founder himself, and who he was willing to hire. So my job as team manager guy, I wasn't just UX manager. I was responsible for developers. We were responsible for shipping code and fixing bugs. I got asked a lot. I wrote a book about project management. What methods did you use? Did you use Scrum? Was it Agile? Was it Agile Scrum? Was it Agile Scrum Plus? Was it Agile Six Sigma plus minus? I'm like, we didn't do any of that. It was me and my team, and we talked about how we wanted to work. And I told them what I needed to do as the manager, and we just used the blog. And you can see here, well, what would we do? Well, I would make lists of stuff. I have this pet theory that all managers ever do is just make lists, ordered lists. Most important thing, next most important thing, third. And that sounds easy, but it's not. To make really good ordered lists where it's built in. If you do this, then the next, then the next. If you do that well and you get your team to work in that way, that's really the magic of why some people are good at leading and managing and some people aren't. Anyway, clearly I'm obsessed with lists. So what did I do? I would make the list. Here's the bugs we're going to fix. Here's the features we're going to design. Here's the stuff we're going to build. And then my team would come along and they'd grab items and we'd mark them off when they were done. If we had a conversation about something, we'd talk about it. When the list got too messy, which inherently it would, I would go and review all the stuff that hadn't been done yet, and I'd make a new list. End of story. We never really needed, well, in some cases, eventually we outgrew this. But for the most part, the solutions were built into these simple tools. So the same thing was true for prototyping. If ever we had more complex UI things we needed to do, one of the more complex things we worked on was something called Jetpack, which if you use WordPress, it's a popular plugin for WordPress. That was one of the things my team built. That was the most challenging project we worked on because, unlike everything else, it was shipped code. Wasn't part of the live service where we could fix a bug when we wanted. It was shipped code. It had a schedule. It had PR commitments. So it was a much more traditional project. And it was terrifying for me to figure out how to do anything on a planned, scheduled basis in an organization and culture that had no history of shipping things, dates, times, what, PR commitments. So what, there's going to be an ad on TV? Why do we care? What? Anyway, so it was a more complex project. What did we do? Well, we used the blog to make our prototypes of stuff, and then we'd have our discussions. We would do more high-fidelity prototypes in the same way that you would do in any other normal work environment. When some of the interactions became too complex to do on the blog, we would do flowcharts. Sometimes, and this maybe happened 5 or 6 times in the year and a half I worked there, we would do online whiteboarding together, where we'd actually get me and the designer or a developer, we'd do a shared whiteboard. We would go, do you mean this? Do you mean this? And we would go back and forth. It was not needed that much, but if we needed to do it, we'd come up with a way to go ahead and do it. A few other things before I open the floor for Q&A. So over the course of the year and a half that I worked there, there was a lot of experimentation going on. And in fact, I think one of the best lessons to come out of the book and to come out of some of the things I am telling you, because you all probably have opinions in your mind. Could I work that way? If I could work that way, could my team work that way? Could my company work that way? And that's not really the best question I want you to leave this whole story with. A much better question is, what experiment am I doing right now in how I work? What is the thing I am trying to do differently now than I have done before? Since so much of this was new, they've worked remotely before, but they hadn't worked in teams before. So a lot of what we ended up doing as a team was experimenting. We really didn't know how to make this work. I didn't know how to manage people who were doing just fine without a manager for their entire career, basically. So we looked at it as an experiment. That was a very important word to use. An experiment means you are doing an activity precisely because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. That's why you're doing it, because you don't know. That is the basis, you could argue, that is the basis for all scientific progress, is the basic for all intelligence gathering and wisdom, is you do something and you're not quite sure because you've never done it before, and then you learn something and then you do another experiment. And most workplaces, this book's been out for maybe 2 months now, so I've been to lots of places talking about it. Most workplaces are doing 0 experiments. 0. And then I come along and I have all these radical, crazy notions. Hire by trial, remote work, use blogs instead of email. And they freak out and go, I couldn't do any of these things. And I say, that's fine. I don't work for WordPress. I'm not advocating them. I don't work for a remote tools company. I'm not advocating that. The only thing I would even try to sell you on is you need to experiment. That's the job of any person who's a professional. It's even more important if any of you are leaders or managers. That's the primary thing that you do because you have the power to do more interesting experiments. That's my pitch on experimentation. Anyway, this slide is not supposed to be about experimentation, I don't think. Oh, yes, it was. Okay. So what you're seeing here, one experiment was, well, if we have teams, how are they going to, what about all these intangible things that even though we're technologists, we know we need to get to know each other? So we were told when teams formed, on the week I was hired, that there was going to be support for teams getting together in the same place and time. So this is a picture of me meeting my team basically for the first time. And since Mike lived in California, Andy Peatling lived in Ireland, and Bo Lebbins was from Australia, we could probably pick pretty much anywhere to go and meet. So we were in Athens, Greece. It's hard to know it because we were in some really crappy hotel lobby trying to work on uncomfortable couches. But we actually got together and met. And over the course of working together for a year and a half, we ended up trying out all these different configurations of remote work. Sometimes we'd all be apart. That was the primary situation. Sometimes, like in this photo, we'd all be together. Sometimes it'd just be one or two of us working together in the same place. And when we worked in the same place, we'd often adopt normal working methods of working at a whiteboard or working on a pad and paper. The one habit that we had, which may help explain any remote work experiences that you've had that failed, was we always had the habit of when we were done working in person, we made sure we reflected something about what was done in person online. If you're the only remote worker, the only information you can possibly get is what's online. So if the people on your team don't report things online, you are working blind. A lot of remote workers become like Sherlock Holmes, but like the cocaine-addled Sherlock Holmes, where they're always what's going on? What did that mean? Oh, someone posted here. Oh, sent 2 emails. Oh my God, because they are information deprived. So it was built into the culture, and I felt my job as manager to support people who weren't there. It was my job to make sure when we were done, we wrote something on the blog. Didn't have to be thorough, just had to be, Mike and I actually went out for dinner and we talked about the Fooby Dooby widget, and we think we're going to go with plan A instead of B. 2 sentences. But for anyone who wasn't there, who up until that moment thought we were going with plan A, that information is huge. And they now have a little flag to go, oh, I need to go and talk to Fred and Joe, or whoever made that post to find out what just happened. That's really the one habit that explains why some organizations do better with remote workers than others. It's their discipline and their respect for making sure the information flow is visible to people who aren't physically present. And that's not even about tools or whatever, it's about attitude. How do we make sure this person who works remotely has enough information to do their job well? So we did all sorts of situations. In this case, we were actually all together at a team meeting, and that's Matt Mullenweg, the founder of WordPress, who's my boss, video conferencing in to join our team meeting for a while. So we tried all different scenarios. If you have some particular complaint about a situation you've seen, we did it at one point or another. And there are 2 things I want to share with you, my last bits, about why you should care about all of this stuff. I want to emphasize this whole story should interest you just because of how different it is and how successful they've been with it. Not that you should copy what they've done just because they've done it. There's this question about the future of work. And I've spent a lot of attention, since that's the subtitle of the book, reading about the future of work. And I can tell you this. We suck at predicting the future. Like, we are really bad. And there should be no book that talks about the future of anything that doesn't talk a little bit about the history of people predicting the future of that thing and how wrong they were. That should be like the first chapter should be about that, because that will deflate a lot of the hubris and nonsense about what goes on. So there's one statistic that I think is really important. The Gallup polling service did the survey of American workers. They did it last year, but it was published this year. And 70% of the respondents to that survey said they were unengaged in their work. Unengaged. And about half of that number said they were actively disengaged. It's about 30%. Actively disengaged. Actively disengaged airline pilot. Actively disengaged brain surgeon. Actively disengaged. That's a terrifying statistic. But then you think through in your ordinary life how many people you run into at work who are just not really doing a good job. Actively disengaged means they're not even trying to fake it anymore, you know? They're like, yeah, I suck, I know. Deal with it, you know? So I think that's a scary number. But I don't blame the workers necessarily for that number. I know I've had jobs that were not seen to be good jobs. I've waited tables, I've done telemarketing, I've mowed lawns. And sometimes those jobs were engaging depending on who I worked with and who I was working for. Who I was working for. The person I worked for treated me well and gave me the controls over how I did my job and gave me some framework for where I could perform better and get more rewards for it. My engagement would go up. So I look at this number as an indictment of management in general. And one of the threads of the book, since they didn't have managers at WordPress.com before, is me continually asking the question, what value do I add as a manager? Maybe the answer is 0, that certain environments don't need managers. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Me doing experiments to try to figure out what the answer is. When I think I see a group in trouble, a team that's not producing well, a group that has talented designers and user researchers, but ships really crappy stuff, I blame the manager first. I think managers should be held far more accountable for things going wrong than they currently do. The second statistic is about remote work. And I get asked this all the time. There's all kinds of conflicting data about remote work. The best summation of all the data I have seen, it's about 20%. But 20% of all professional work is done remotely. And that number has been rising and will continue to rise. And I think for any of you who are like, remote work can't work, it's just great, not in my environment, maybe for other people, think about how much time you spend working with your coworkers purely through your laptop, purely through a screen. It's got to be 30%, 40%, 50%. Anytime you're working purely through a screen, email, chat, whatever it is, you could be anywhere on the planet. You could be anywhere during that time. The rest of the time, fine. You could argue maybe the rest of the time there's value in being in the same place. But among the rest of the time, is you sitting in boring meetings wishing you're on your laptop? You're listening to some person drone on and on and on? So it's probably even smaller the number of actual percentage of time you need to be in the same place to be effective in what you do. As the tools get better and the technologies get better, that number is going to continue to rise. I never think it's going to be 80% or some majority number, but it's going to continue to be a topic of conversation, certainly in digital-centric work professions, about what that number is and how to make it work, how to take advantage of it for the better. If you liked what I said, you think a coworker should check it out, or maybe a manager, I'm speaking Thursday. PayPal has this cool event. I've never been to it before. There's apparently free beer and pretzels, two things you can't get, two things you have to be in person to get, so you can't just listen in. You got to actually go. But I'll be speaking on Thursday, and I'm happy to open the floor for questions. Thank you for listening so far. Thank you.
I get to ask the first question.
Oh,
That was great.
you got a
Thank
book.
you, Scott. Oh.
I learned from Leah.
Yeah, I didn't
Can you
even
pass
know
this back?
that.
Oh, give it back.
But I left. I think I still get the book.
You do.
So you mentioned it's not the tools, it's the attitude, and that's something that really resonated with me in terms of this culture of being able to work remotely and communicating well. And I know you felt that the hiring by trial was an important part of creating that culture at WordPress. Is there anything else that something that you would recommend to help bring that culture more into one that is not supportive?
I think it all starts with the manager. Forget hire by trial, just hiring. The greatest factor in all of these little things, we wonder why they're better in some places than others. Who made the hiring decision? There's a great argument that the most important thing any boss does, the single thing that contributes most to his success, is who they hire. Period. Period. If they're good at that and they hire well, and they give room to those people to do their jobs, that eliminates most of the problems you're going to deal with. If they hire people who are talented but are assholes, people who are empire builders, there's like this long list, and you all worked with them. How did they get in the company? They didn't just show up one day and take over an office. Someone went out of their way and chose to give them a contract. So I really think blame the manager. Blame the manager. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're in charge. Yeah.
So aside from the obvious benefit of not having to spend money on office space, what benefit to the company did you see in a workforce that's entirely remotely? And conversely, what do you think might be lost?
So there's a long list of these benefits. The 37 Signals folks wrote a book called Remote, which is it's the orthogonal book to mine, in that it's an argument for remote work. Here's the 10 reasons, here's the 7 things, here's the 6 things, and you'll probably get if you want to make the case, it's a good book to start with. The basic ones are simple. You can hire the best talent. They don't have to relocate. Relocation is a large barrier for a lot of people. Second, it defines the autonomy for them. So if you're a remote worker, it means you're probably choosing your own hours. You're probably setting up your office yourself. For people who want a lot of control over their environment, and again, not everyone wants a lot of control, but if you do, this is better than the office is of your own creation. The third is diversity. You're now able to get people who are not just, weren't just their ancestors were from a place. They live in Tokyo, or they are in India, and they're contributing to a project. And if you think that adds chemistry and value of the diversity of ideas, you get that just by hiring them. There's a longer list of ones. What you lose, I think, is I was really surprised at how much camaraderie my team built. And the book tries to explain how that happened and what I think I did that helped it and what I think I did that hurt it. My particular team did not suffer from that. I had as much fun working with my team as probably any other team that I've ever worked on. But for some personalities and some people, you miss those things. The team meetings, I didn't mention this, we ended up doing them about once a quarter. That was our speed. About every 3 or 4 months, we'd make a plan, and as many people who wanted to go, all this stuff is always optional. You don't have to travel if you don't want to. That would always, when new people got hired, that would help them to learn a couple of the inside jokes and the intangible things. Oh, he's actually not being a jerk. He's just being sarcastic. Ah, got it now. Like you pick up these little bits of people's personality only through when we get the most data, which is in person. So I think if you do it without that, it's a mistake. If I hired a remote worker, I'd be planning once a year, twice a year. If they let them come, or we should go there and get some of that connection.
I think a lot of people, when they're working, they need to get into a flow of work in order to not be interrupted, in order to really focus and get things and be productive. So when you're doing communication on things like IRC, how do you manage the need to communicate with someone with the need of them to not be interrupted all the time in order to focus?
There's this fundamental thing. It's not written on a wall anywhere, but it was in the culture. I became very aware of it within the first week of working there after I got through the support thing, which was employees are in control. If I go into IRC, it's not guaranteed my teammates are going to be there. And if they're there, I ping them and say, hey, can we chat now? And they may have it turned off. I may know already from working with them that if they don't respond right away, I should leave them alone. So we learned all these little habits of convention. As a manager, I had a compact. We just sort of worked it out. I never sat down to meet with them to figure it out. We sorted it out that if I couldn't get them on IRC, my next escalation path, speaking like a project manager now, my escalation path was Skype. If I couldn't get them on Skype and it was really important, like they just blew up half the servers or something, get them on the phone. If I couldn't get them on the phone, I was kind of stuck. But it almost never happened that I needed to get someone on the phone. It was also sort of built into the culture that there's very little turf. So if something's on fire and you're not around, someone else is going to fix it. That's just the way it is. And that's built into the way they think of software development. They want people to be comfortable jumping around and doing different things. So the short answer is, you as an employee, you decide within some minimal compact with your team. So we eventually had a team meeting once a week that we would all have to be on at the same time. Outside of that, as long as people were getting their work done, didn't matter. Yeah.
So you've talked very well a lot about transient communications. What about the persistent information, like the architecture and design of the software, so some developer doesn't break something, or somebody has to pick up another part he's never seen before because somebody can't get on the phone?
It's awful. There's none of that. And one of the things in the book where people say, in reading the book, it seemed like you had mixed feelings about some of the culture. I totally did. Any sort of software engineering background, if you have any sort of quality assurance knowledge and you go in there and look around, your head will explode. Like, how does this thing work at all? And how would I find out if this guy got hit by a bus? How would I know? So one of my complaints was, I'm not a zealot about those things, but there should be some effort to solve some of those problems. Their answer, and it's an okay answer, it just has flaws in it, is that they're always working incrementally. And since WordPress itself is this open source public domain thing, there's so many people who have these things that the knowledge isn't isolated in the same way that it would be on a conventional corporate proprietary project. And I think there's some merit to that argument. There's some places where it falls apart, but there's definitely some merit to it. So you're totally right. And I think that as the company gets bigger, they're going to start to feel a little bit more pain from not having some of those things. But I don't think they need as much of it as some people think that they do.
Could you just clarify how you get hired by trial, but you start in customer service?
Yes. So hired by trial means if you're a designer, you're a developer, and you start contributing to WordPress, it's open source, and people start to notice, hey, you did a great job. Hey, maybe you should do a trial. You'd eventually have to work your network, and you'd apply, and you'd be offered, hey, we'll do a trial. You're a designer. Here's something we're building. Go design it. If you do the trial well, you finish the cupcake, to use my earlier metaphor. You make a good cupcake. It tastes good. It has high integrity and whatever. You're offered a job. Once you take the job to be a designer or a lawyer or a marketer, you will spend your first 3 weeks as a junior person in customer support answering customer support tickets. And you get a little bit of training, but the training is basically answer this ticket. You spend like a day doing password reset requests. That's all you do. And then you get a harder ticket and a harder ticket, and it's forcing you to learn more about WordPress. A lot of what I was taught was to use the community. So as soon as I started getting harder tickets, I was told, go to IRC and ask for help. Now, I'm a man, I'm a writer, I'm a bit arrogant. I don't ask for help unless my leg's on fire, especially to strangers, especially at a new company where I'm a former Microsoft employee and they're all open source advocates. I'm not asking for help. So I went in there eventually because I couldn't figure out this thing, and I asked for help, and like 3 people replied. I didn't know any of these people. I didn't know where they were. They were like, hey, what do you need? Whoa! So I thought that was like a fluky thing. The next day, it's built in. The customer support thing teaches you the culture, and you get all this benefit and support, and then now, after you become an employee and there's a new person starting, and you're in IRC and they ask a question, what do? You remember being that person, and now you... So what is that? That's community, that's culture. You could argue that comes from the open source roots of the project, that there's a good support for volunteers, because volunteers can just walk away. And I'd never really experienced anything quite like that before. How do you create that from scratch, or how do you fix a company that has the opposite culture? Those are really hard questions. But as a case study, it should show an example of a place that functions this way. Yeah?
There are several famous examples here in the Bay Area of supposedly successful companies who believe completely the opposite of what you're talking about. Google and Yahoo both are on record as wanting everybody to be in one place so that they can meet in the hall. Google can't buy land fast enough in Mountain View and the rest of the Bay Area to build enough offices for their people to be located closely. How can it be that there are such different conclusions that these companies have come to about what works and what doesn't, what works well?
Well, I think it's a fascinating thing. So I mentioned one of my other books is about innovation. I've studied innovation models and innovation theory and all this stuff, and I find it really fascinating how narrow everyone is about their view of how to do things, including innovation. That's the problem with all the books, is they're so narrow. Well, you have to do it this way, the 10 ways, the 6 ways, the 5 ways. There's lots of different cultures on the planet. There's lots of different ways to do something as challenging as making software. If you told me what question I get asked a lot, if I was starting a company, what would I do? I would probably want to be with the people I was working with. If you told me that the only way to work with the people I wanted to work with was for them to be remote, I'd be like, yeah, we could do a good job working that way. I don't think it's a barrier. I think these other cultural things are the big barriers. There's a bunch of other things to think about too, which I didn't mention that come up in the book. Is we have so much weird tradition built into how we think about work, about how we dress. Software industry is a little bit different there, but 9 to 5 working hours, commuting, offices, meetings. There's not a lot of scientific evidence for 9 to 5 working hours. There really isn't. There's not a lot of scientific evidence about meetings. In fact, there's a lot of scientific evidence that says meetings are bad. What do we mostly do at work? What's 30% of probably most of your days filled with meetings? How could that be? I think it's a great question. The answers are probably going to be fractional. There's going to be many different kinds of answers to that question. So Yahoo's a weird example because they're not really doing that well. I don't know why they keep coming up as a great example. Because when Yahoo decided not to do remote work, I got asked this question all the time, like, why are we paying so much attention to Yahoo? The reason why they decided to stop doing remote work is because their company is having major problems. They're recovering from it's not Melissa Mayer's fault. It's that they're recovering from a long history of problematic years. All the best people probably left. So she's in a mode of crisis recovery. And yet one person decides to ban something and everyone goes, should everyone ban it? Yahoo's breathing. Should we stop breathing? Oh my God. They painted their walls blue. Google has blue walls. Should we have blue walls? And my favorite example of this is just the office space thing, which is a perennial ridiculous thing. Open spaces, no, you need offices, no. Open spaces, no, you need offices, open spaces. This will go on forever, it'll end of time. It's sort of like flat 3D, flat 3D. Flat, oh, flat's great. Oh, wait, 3D, flat 3D UI, flat. You would go on forever. And people will always argue which is better. It doesn't, it's the wrong question.
Centralized, decentralized.
Yeah, it doesn't, I think it's the wrong kinds of questions.
So Scott, you've been talking a lot about the process at WordPress. I'm curious about your process. You talked at the beginning about going back and doing the work again, and you went to WordPress. How was it? How was it that you chose WordPress? Where did it, I could think of 18 answers to that, but I want yours.
So I thought at some point I should go back. I think any author expert person should. It seemed, and I wasn't specifically looking for an opportunity to do it, but it was in the back of my mind. They offered me a job. I had done, Matt Mullenweg had read some of my other books, and we knew each other a little bit, and they had me do a little bit of consulting for them, which he now says is that was my hire by trial. That they had me do a little bit of consulting for them about management and teams and whatnot. And then when the company got big enough and they decided to form into teams, that one of the experiments he wanted to do was most of these teams, or all of them, except for one, will be led by people who are already at the company. Let's throw another curveball into this experiment. They're very big fans of simultaneous experiments. Because they're like, what's the worst that can happen? We'll kill the experiment. So I was just another experiment for them. And they nicely fit this thing I thought in the back of my mind. And as well, I told them I would only do it if I could write a book about it. And they said, sure. And they gave me no restrictions on what I could write about, which is a very unusual prospect to have. And also, I'm a WordPress user. You get very few opportunities in your career as designers and makers to work on something you use all the time. That's rare. And it happened once before when I worked at Microsoft, and now I had a second chance. So it seemed like three birds with one stone.
So Leah mentioned at the end of her talk that there was a very interesting trend where consulting is becoming a bit, more widely used by companies. And you're saying that in your vision of the future, there is a lot more remote collaboration, working without pants. I'm wondering, in your vision of the future, does crowdsourcing play a role in this? And does it put fuel in this distributed work model? And do you think that's a possibility that I could be working for Facebook on Monday, Apple on Tuesday, and I'll be doing it without pants in my living room?
Well, the pants question is too personal. I don't want to get into your pants. It's a little. I don't know that I can give you a single answer. I want to make clear, I don't really have a vision of the future. If I would offer you a vision for the future, it would be the word experimentation. All the stuff they do should not work. All the MBA, tons can't work remotely. Blah. They can. Can't be an important company. They are. Can't be profitable. They are. I mean, so all those things are true, and I want people to leave all the stories I told you. What experiment should I be doing in my workplace? What is the thing I'm convinced can't work? I should pick one of them every few months and try it. Just try it out. Pitch your manager, can I try working this way? And so some people ask me the common question, I want to work remotely, my boss won't let me. And I'll tell you how to get your boss to let you try to work remotely. Number one, be awesome at your job. Be awesome, be really good. If you suck at your job, your boss is not going to let you do anything. It has nothing to do with remote work. That's about their opinion of you. So do really well at your job, and then go to your boss and say, hey, I think I can work just as well as I've been working from home. Let me try to work this way for a week or a month. Let me try. If I am right, you lose nothing, and my morale goes up. If I'm wrong, you lose nothing. After a week, well, I'll stop working this way. You have nothing to lose by letting me try. They actually have everything to win. They should want employees that are looking for ways to be better at their jobs. Their job is to say, yes, go try. It'd be hard maybe to come up with how you know it's gone well. Maybe it's easier if you worked in a factory and you're supposed to produce 10 widgets a week and you produce 11 from home. You could say, hey, I've done a better job. But you should come up with some compact with them about how you're evaluated and use that as your way to work remotely.
Scott, could you just give a list of some of the experiments you've run in your own life on managing?
On managing?
Yeah, I mean, is that what you said, or work experiments? Can you just think of a few? It sounds like you did some team building things.
A lot of the work experiments this is all like bizarro work world. Because they're so unconventional, a lot of things I did that were experimental there are extremely conventional. Having a weekly meeting. Having a weekly meeting where you use the voice. You use your voice. I mean, these things were, to introduce them, it was just All the same resistors. Well, we never worked that way before. We don't need to do that. I don't see the upside. So I had this very odd situation where I had to convince people of standard practices. Or I had to at least convince them enough. I had to do the same thing. I had to tell my team, let's try this. If in a week we don't like it, I'll stop. Experimental mentality again. And often we would do things, and sometimes they wouldn't work, but then we'd have a conversation about it, and both of us would have new ideas for the next experiment to try. That's exactly what all the platitudes about good work environments, that's what it's supposed to be like, right? Hey, we'll try, okay, we're learning, we're trying. It only happens when someone's willing to do experiments.
So I worked from home for about a year for a company, and I just found it incredibly isolating, even though we used a lot of the same tools and had conference calls galore. There's nothing like collaborating with a person face to face. I think there's something missed about facial expressions. Can you go into that?
Sure, yeah. Again, I'm not a remote work advocate or zealot. I'm an advocate that you should try it because you may learn some things about what you do like about work or what's most important to you about work. A lot of people, when they got hired, went through this phase about 3 months in where they started feeling isolated. They didn't know why. And I've concluded, this is my hypothesis, is that the workplace is social. So even if you're introverted, and I'm basically an introvert, even if you're introverted, you still get all the free social interaction. You get the coworker who's the happy hour guy. Hey, you want to go out for a drink? They go by everyone's office and just bring someone. And you just go, hey, you're on the bus. You just get to go along. So there's always this background socialization you get from being in a workplace. And you don't realize how much you get from that until you're at home working alone. You're getting zero. So usually what happens is if people decide they want to stay working at the company, they realize they have to take it on themselves to fill that void. A common thing that people at WordPress.com do is what's called co-working. There are lots of these spaces now. You rent a desk at an office with other crazy remote workers like yourself, and it gives you some of that physical space sharedness. And the happy hour guy now, you get access to that again. And so you get a middle ground. And WordPress.com gives a stipend to people who want to do that. So it's not for everybody. There's so many personal preferences about work, this being one of them. Another one is commuting. Some people think it's okay. They're willing to make all the trades to commute 2 hours each way every day. Like, I think it's completely insane. That's 4 hours a day. There's so many trade-offs we make about income versus how much passion we have for the work versus there's all these dimensions. And I think remote or not is just another dimension in that. It's very personal. So if you didn't like it, I'd say, okay, this is not for you. Hired by trial, it should reveal that before you get hired, that you're not going to like it.
So this is our last question, but I'm sure the speakers will hang out afterwards, so make it great.
So just in my opinion, I work remotely, and I love it. I've been doing it for 15 years now, and I can't imagine anything else. But my question is, why did you leave WordPress, and what are you doing now?
Oh, well, I'm a writer, as I mentioned at the beginning. So my ambition is, as Christian mentioned, I cleared the shelf when I quit to write books. It's a shelf near my desk. And I needed something I would see every day to remind me what I was trying to do. And I didn't really know this is what I would end up doing, but I thought, okay. And so that's my ambition. I just want to fill the shelf. So I worked there for a year. The plan was to work there for a year. I really loved working there. I enjoyed it. I had my complaints, but on the whole, I thought there was so little friction. And as a creator working with a team, there was so little friction. It was just us and our customers. Us and our talents and our customers. That was it. It was amazing. So I stayed there longer than I expected, but I knew that my shelf wasn't going to get filled by working on WordPress. So I tried. One other experiment I tried was before I left, I'd never heard of a manager stepping down and now working for someone who had been working for them. So I said, let's see what happens. So I stepped down as manager. One of the developers took over, and I was a designer on the team. There's another experiment I did. They don't really do a lot of user research. You guys haven't asked too much about this. They don't do a lot of it. And my first job was doing user research, usability engineer. So I experimented with doing different user research methods for my team, for other parts of the company, just to see what would happen. And that's the last couple of chapters of the book, is me doing cognitive walkthroughs with my team. They've never done them before. They don't know what they are. We put up all the pictures on the wall. We did walkthroughs of the whole thing. And anyway, I left because I want to write books.
So let's actually just thank him for writing this book, and then we can all hang out, okay?
Thank you. Thanks.